As promised, here is my Halo Season 2, Episode 2 review, known as Sword. And it has a lot to do with, well, sword base. There's a lot of Reach tie-ins there. I could also see Sword kind of being like the tip of the sword, or the fact that we're really getting close to something nasty going on here. Now, before I begin, you're probably wondering, Jim, what happened to your hair? Why is it so crazy? Well, this, ladies and gentlemen, is a result of my new Ford Bronco, and this is Bronco hair. So when you see my hair all wild, it means I just came in with all the tops down, jamming out to 80s music and grunge music, and I'm looking like a madman. So deal with it, all right? All right. With that out of the way, let's get into the list. So there's a couple really cool things that happened in this episode. There was a couple really cool moments that I think are going to set up future episodes. And then there was a couple things that made you just go, huh? And the thing that made me go, huh, was Kwan again. I was really, really adamant about how I was done with her and the destruction of Madrigal. And I was like, thank you. She's gone. Nope, she's back. And has somehow learned, like Kwan Fu, being able to dismantle this unknown group of people, systematically murdering them. We don't know why. We don't know where she learned the skills she has. We don't know what she's running from or why she's running from what she's running from. It felt very disconnected from the rest of the episode, as Kwan's story did really in the first season. I was hoping they would have learned their lesson and tried to do more thematic tie-ins. It's always great in these TV shows where lots of small plots feed into some major narrative. And while it is possible that Kwan will somehow find her way back into the Fall of Reach, although unlikely, maybe something to do with a keystone or some sort of portal she finds, or I don't know what. Maybe she helps them jump to Halo at the end of the season, the beginning of Installation 04 for hopefully a third season. I don't know what's going to happen. But Kwan as a whole is just kind of in a weird spot, and I'm not really digging her presence, and I'm not really digging her plotline. Just my own thoughts, okay? All right, moving on. Let's talk about some of the really, really cool stuff. First of all, you have Halsey, who is very alive and well and has been captured by Oni, of course. Why wouldn't she be? They're always going to find her, run her down. And she's being held in this interesting kind of simulation of sorts where Flash clones are being sent in systematically to kind of keep her at bay. And as she starts to ask more questions, the Flash clones are dying and then coming back in again. And she's kind of stuck in this like hell almost. It's kind of morbid to think that you're just sitting there watching somebody die over and over and over again. And although Halsey is definitely one of those people who puts kind of the ends justify the means, kind of like, I don't care if people suffer for the greater good type thing. We'll talk about that in just a moment. It's got to really break you down. And the fact that she's sitting there and watching these little girls just die has got to be hard. It does show us that Ackerson is definitely very much against Halsey, and he's really almost treating her like a pet and torturing her. And he doesn't stop there. He's actually doing the same thing with Cortana, having disconnected her from the larger grid and kind of keeping her and quizzing her and asking her over and over to run simulations, which we suspect are going to be how we'll withstand the onslaught of the Covenant. And her replying, I think with 97% certainty that we've got no chance in hell. And if you've read the books, obviously it's the Fall of Reach, so you know how that's going to go down. But it's really interesting to see Ackerson kind of running this weird experiment. It's almost like losing control in a way, but still finding some semblance of holding this odd authority or odd power over characters who are seemingly a little more helpless than he is. It makes me wonder when push comes to shove just how much he'll actually be involved and how much he'll actually be engaged in the fight, or is he going to really weasel out of it? It kind of seems like at times he has this overarching bravado and he's in charge and he's knowing and clearly knows what's going on and he's dismissing things that he feels aren't important. But, this is that whole pride before the fall kind of hubris thing where you could see when the Covenant come in, he could be the first guy running down the hallway screaming for his mom. You just don't know. Very, very interesting, though, to see how that character continues to develop. He is an outstanding character in the show, and he is a great anti-hero slash weasel slash Albert Wesker of the series, who is just kind of in it for himself in a weird way, but somehow rose to a position of prominent power. Speaking of things that Halsey kind of screwed up, we got to talk about Lewis 36. Now, he was the Spartan who is blinded by the augmentation program. I don't talk about it too much here in the show, maybe briefly in episode 3 or 4 of the first season, if I remember correctly. But it's discussed significantly more in the extended universe. So I'm drawing upon my overarching knowledge of Halo to kind of fill in some of the gaps here. But the Spartan 2 program, which abducted the children and replaced them with Flash clones and then ran all these experiments on them, was not a very successful program in terms of overall yield of resulting candidates. Many of the children flat out died as due to the augmentation. Many more had major deficiencies or some sort of genetic defects that arose, like Soren or Lewis. Many more were crippled or had brain damage, some which even went to Oni, because while they were physically unable to operate mentally, they still had a high capacity. They're almost treated as like engineers almost from the Forerunners, the floating, if you played ODST, right, the engineer that you were trying to capture at the end, the Hurungok. Some of those Spartans were almost treated like that. So it is interesting to see some of the Spartans in this that didn't quite make it. Some of the ones that had some issues that needed, more TLC and were just thrown away. Lewis is one of those. So he quickly befriends Riz. Riz is obviously going through her own ordeal after the last season. Pretty hellacious burns on her body and still trying to recover. And she's kind of mentally starting to wear down. I mean, even though Spartans are super soldiers and they wear the helmets and they're supposed to be this, endless stoic fighting force, the reality is there is a human element to this. And there is a logistical element to this of just running out of steam. You just can't keep up that pace for so long. And Riz is starting to struggle, and John notices it. And instead of taking her under his wing, he instead pushes her and the rest of the team harder, telling them that the Covenant aren't resting and neither should we. That's a really significant moment in the show as well, because looking at the history of Halo and the characters in Halo, a lot of people attribute the Master Chief as being the biggest, the toughest, the baddest Spartan. He never was. He's never the fastest. He's not the strongest. He's not the best shot. He's not the most critical thinker. What John has over all the other Spartans is sheer willpower. And you're seeing that on display here significantly. Pablo Schreiber talked about it a lot at the end of the episode, the Declassified episode, talking about how, as the world begins to close in around John, he has even more clarity and focus in what he needs to do. He's even more at peace with the fact that he has to go to war. And as he begins to lose these connections to his teammates, and as he begins to realize that the UNSC isn't taking his recommendation for war more seriously, he is even more self-resolved. And that is such display here. He realizes that Riz is struggling. He realizes that, things aren't, the UNSC isn't preparing in the right way. His response is even more a self-reflection and even driving his team harder so that they're ready, because he knows he's going to be at the front of the fight. And that is what makes him the elite Spartan in the UNSC. None of those other skills. And I really like that detail here. I suspect a lot of people probably didn't think about it at the layer that I just did, but that's what makes the Master Chief such an amazing character, is his steadfast resolution and determination to any problem that he comes across. Well, we find that Riz is starting to struggle, and she goes to see other people and get outside help and to try to get better. It may dabble into some sort of like medication where she starts to become like a doper and she's like taking adrenaline shots or something to like get more powerful. That remains to be seen. As a quick aside, as the real Halo nerd here, I would be remiss if I did not tell you about the Achilles project and the Achilles AI, which is actually an unlockable in Halo 5 Guardians. It was the armor that I rocked as I wrapped up my experience with that game. But the Achilles AI drove Spartans mad because it pushed them to continue to fight even when they physically couldn't anymore. And they basically mentally shut down and physically shut down. And that project was ultimately scrapped. But it's a really, really cool kind of almost nod to what's going on with Riz and John and the fact that he's not giving up and letting up on her, and he's pushing her even though she's struggling. And by the way, how beautiful was that scene where they're training and fighting those serene hills? It looked like something right out of Halo Infinite, didn't it? Where you had these nice rolling hills and running streams and brooks. A lot of times you look at Halo and you think of like the mechanical warfare of like the Forerunner technology or hard light or a distant planet covered in grass where you have all the, Covenant vehicles kicking up dust in the background and you're rolling through the battle. This was really cool to see, almost like a Blood Gulch-esque kind of element. Not Blood Gulch. Blood Gulch element into Halo, where you didn't really see that before, right? Where it was more like militarized and industrial. Here you have a much more natural scene, and I really appreciate that. That was a really, really good scene. So John ultimately, though, is starting to figure out, something's going on here. He's doing more research. The fire team that we were introduced to last week is vanishing. John puts 2 and 2 together and realizes that the Covenant have, in fact, landed on Reach. They're beginning to take out comm towers on Reach. The invasion proper has begun. They have taken out enough of the kind of like rim worlds, and they've driven their way into Reach, and now the beginning of the battle. So you're starting to see a lot of overlap from Halo Reach, the video game, and the Fall of Reach novel. And you're starting to see a lot of that crossover with the television show. And some of the elements are starting to blend up. Obviously, it's only going to be probably within the next episode or 2 where a full-out war happens. And then I suspect we'll start to see the aftermath of that war. I'm not really quite sure yet of the timeline of what they're going to do. If the whole season is going to take place at the Fall of Reach, or the Fall of Reach is going to be like one of those Battle of the Bastards episodes that we saw in Game of Thrones, where it's like nobody's talking and it's just an hour of fighting. I would be happy with either, honestly. It's a very significant moment in a lot of UNSC characters' history, what they were doing to support or defend or try to help on Reach. A lot of them didn't make it. The rise of the Spartan 3 program, a lot of the mental hardening and toughening and the kind of we got to go get them revenge attitude that drives characters like John to, fight even harder when he goes and kind of takes the, finish the fight. He's taking it back to the Covenant, kind of like one of those like, this is for Reach kind of thing. Obviously, the Noble team, Noble 6, all of the players that were involved in supporting that in the proper lore, we'll see how that trickles into the television show. Really, really good episode all in all. Of course, it ends with two amazing moments. I think I just did like 8, but it was really just 2 amazing moments. One was when all of the Marines are lined up, standing in the hallway, like in sword base or castle base. I'm not sure. They might have said where it was. I wasn't paying attention because I was just marking out to how cool it was. Shooting the single lone stealth elite down the hallway and shooting him. And then the second team advancing, and then silence, and then obviously the Covenant dude, the elite, coming up with his energy sword and just hacking through people. Really, really cool scene. I wonder in shows like this always, and I get it for the television and such, but you have a defensive position. You have like 20 dudes shoulder to shoulder, or maybe it was like 12. I don't even know how many people were there. Don't go forward. Just wait. Shoot a couple rounds and then just wait. You don't have to engage in every single battle, but I get it for the sake of television. We had to you had to show once again just how menacing the Covenant are. And it's awesome scenery to see this giant elite facing up against the human and dismantling them. It makes the scenes in which the Spartans are able to go toe to toe with them, it makes you feel even more passionate about the Spartans. And then, of course, the final scene, the return of McKee, which I can't explain. I'm sure it will be made sense at some point. And I think everybody had speculated it was her at the end of the first episode, the shadowy figure that pulls away the forces. Why would the Covenant not kill Jon? Well, obviously, if they were controlled by somebody who had some feelings for Jon, and who was that? So I'm not saying that McKee and Jon relationship is great. I honestly kind of had thought initially that it was kind of going to be retcon, kind of like the way at the beginning of the first episode, they're like, oh, and Madrigal's dead, and this doesn't happen, and Cortana gets removed from Jon, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, fast forward, we're not talking about that anymore. I kind of thought maybe they were going to go that route with McKee as well and just kind of retcon her from the story. But no, they're doubling down on Kwan. They're doubling down on McKee. They are back. I'm not saying we're going to get the return of Master Cheeks. I hope not. But obviously there is a connection there. And I think in their own stupid way, the TV show is trying to kind of force that connection such that when he meets her again, which you know he will, he's going to pause for just a moment because that's his love interest, girlfriend, hostage, whatever you want to call that weird relationship they had. He's going to pause for just a moment. He's going to be like, and maybe during that moment, something critical happens and he gets bamboozled, or maybe he has to realize, to kind of put that aside, the whole man versus machine thing, which is definitely a subplot throughout this whole season. So all in all, really, really good episode. I really enjoyed it. I still look at social media and I see a lot of people are kind of lukewarm to it. Some people like it, some people don't. As I said in the first episode, and as I'll say in every single episode review I do for this show was made for fans like me. Guys who love the game, love the lore, love everything about the Halo universe. I appreciate what the TV show is doing. There are still things I think they can improve upon, but they're really taking great strides to flesh out more characters, to make it more inspiring, and especially as we inch even closer to the inevitable destruction of Reach and the UNSC retaliation that's going to take place, and what Ackerson has been up to with the Spartan 3s, and seeing how all that plays out has me giddy, because they have such an open playbook of really cool things and really cool stories from both the main canon and even the ancillary canon of the side stories that took place in all the books and comic books that they can draw upon for the show. So I don't know what direction they're going to go in, but I cannot wait for the next episode. But rest assured, after it airs, I'll be sitting right back here with my Bronco hair, here to tell you guys my thoughts on that episode. That wraps up today's review. Thank you guys so much for watching. Take care of yourselves, and until next time, I will see you guys on the other side.